The Great Steppe, millenniums of events, hundreds of nomadic tribes and people. They lived, worked, made discoveries, conquered large tracts of lands, and left us some mysteries. To learn more about it, watch the project called Enigma of the Great Steppe. The beginning of the last century, Aul lost in the steppe. One of the hot days, an unusual guest appeared here. It was not that the guest was unexpected, but unusual. Uzun, kulak, long ear, steppe male, transmitting any rumor from rider to rider, from Aul to Aul, spread the message better than any radio. He does not know the local word. However, he is so open and curious that he is invited to the yurt. They ask him to sit down, as it is customary at dastarkhan, and begin to ask questions. Everything is interesting here for the newcomer, the owner and his guest, and his house and unusual food, but most importantly, the conversation. Let it be through an interpreter, even if half of the words are not understood. But how exciting! The yurt is full of guests. They are all sitting around. My place is next to the host. Beside me there are two honorable mullahs. One is wearing a turban, must be a very important person. Our host, sitting next to an enormous wooden bowl, pours kumis with a big spoon. Every now and then, guests are handing him their wooden cups that the host fills up tirelessly. Behind him sits his gray-headed mistress. She is all huddled in black masks, silent, giving her orders unnoticed. Poet and interpreter are near the fire, squatting. This is how the Russian classic Mikhail Prishvin will describe this meeting later. These diaries and an oilcloth notebook, erased or illegible in some places, will become the property of literature along with his stories. Prishvin's diaries are an intellectual position, regardless of political conjuncture. This is a document. The document of not just an ordinary person there, but of an educated person, a progressive person of his time. In Kazakhstan, Prishvin played a positive role in terms of forming such a correct image of the Kazakhs for the Russian public. He had an understanding of the difficult situation of the Kazakh people. So what was a lone traveler really looking for in the distant and unfamiliar Asia? What did he see and what did he learn about the life of nomads? Where do the Indians and mind read concern Uly-Dala? What did the Great Steppe give to the singer of nature? And what prophecy is hidden in Prishvin's diaries? However, first things first. For the first time, an attempt to get to Asia, the cradle of human history, Misha being a second grader. He read Mind Read and Jules Verne a lot, and together with his comrades, dashed to a distant, happy country. They saved money, bought a boat, food, and even a gun. However, the fugitives were quickly caught. Two older guys were expelled from the Yeletskaya gymnasium. The director would not have thought that Misha was the main instigator. To tell you the truth, he was also punished. Misha was sent to a detention room for 2 days. Went to Asia and got to the gymnasium. They laughed at the losers. But the dream has remained. This lyrical digression is not for nothing. Rebellious spirit and stubbornness will play a huge role in the life of Prishvin and in his works. At first glance, his character traits, even negative ones. This is his kind of indiscipline, his desire to destroy some kind of framework and the society where he lived. If they were not there, all these impulses, there would be no writer himself. Later, Prishvin recalled, "I consider my escape from the gymnasium to Asia as the beginning of my biography dedicated to discoveries and evidence of my own face and me." He was coming from a wealthy background. He could have been a great merchant. He could own estates. His uncle has left him a grand fortune. He could have been a wealthy landowner, one of the richest and most prosperous people of his time. But all his works, all Prishvin's works, were dedicated to his wanderings. The boy was expelled from the gymnasium. Defending his opinion, sometimes he crossed all the borders. A well-known, Rozanov, was his teacher of the gymnasium. This is the star of Russian philosophical thought of the beginning of the 20th century. As a teacher, he imposed his philosophical thoughts on the students, which the children might not have been interested in at that time. Rozanov taught him at the gymnasium. And what do you think? Being a teacher, when he made remarks to teenager Mikhail Mikhailovich had his independence, his independent vision. He said that if they made such comments, in particular, he said it to Rozanov, despite the fact that Rozanov was a household name of the whole province and gymnasium, he will beat his face. Just a peasant's behavior. That is right. Mother sent Misha to Tyumen, to his uncle. He had to take up the mind. The education was difficult, but he got it. And what an education it was. The program of Alexandrovsky, non-classical secondary school. It is a program of Moscow State University, the Faculty of Philosophy. Second, he is going to study at the University of Leipzig. Just imagine that at that time, not everyone could enter there. Prishvin graduated as an agronomist, but then he became a journalist. However, he never ceased dreaming about a cherished land of happiness, a land without name and territory, the one we escaped to in our childhood. Why wasn't he in jail and did not write in the office? Wherever he was many years, the whole north of Russia, the famous Solovki Arkhangelsk, where all our punished persons, the elite of Russia, here in particular, our Alash Orda people, were in jail. And at that time, he goes around all these terrible places. And you know, this is not a train, not a plane. He goes around by foot, on post horses, mounted on a horse. By all means, as if he is checking himself for survival. I mean, a man. Can I stand it or not? The stories in the land of not frightened birds for a magic roly-poly were brought out in which there is truth in fiction, geography and poetry. But something did not give Prishvin peace, and he was forced to go all over the vast expanses. The time of Prishvin is in the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. It is still the time of empty world in which people explored and studied. This is a period of Orientalism explosion, Orientalist studies all over the world, in Europe and Russia as well. Increased interest in the East, and Prishvin begins to study the eastern margins of the empire too, in particular Siberia and Kazakhstan. Prishvin's recognition, like his diploma, was slow. His first story, Sashok, was published when the writer was 33 years old. He grins. I grab my happiness like a bird, on the fly, with one accurate shot. But journalism was still feeding him. Russian Gazette was a liberal publication. How did this liberalism manifest itself? In a matter of speaking, this magazine picked up these people who were removed by the then Tsarist government. They could write, publish in this edition, including Prishvin. He worked as a correspondent above all, and thanks to this very work, he found his way to Kazakhstan. In summer of 1909, Prishvin received an assignment from the editorial office to make a series of notes on the life of the peasant migrants. The reason for such active interest of the Russian intellectual society to Kazakhstan and Siberia was also connected with political events. You know that in 1861, the elimination of serfdom liberated a large number of the population of the Russian Empire from serfdom. But this led to the fact that these peasants needed land. Therefore, such an outstanding figure of the Russian establishment, Pyotr Stolypin, tried to solve this problem by the so-called Stolypin reform. This was the allotment of land to peasants in the colonial margins, primarily in Siberia and Kazakhstan. Prishvin is inspired. He's going to underexplored Pritish steppes. Here is the thought to visit Asia, to see, perceive this steppe, which you read about, of course. To see this unusual nature. This Asia beckoned him. Alas, the first trip was completely devoid of romanticism, and a closer acquaintance with the local settlers, small merchants, and second-rate clerks who recently moved to the steppe literally depressed Prishvin. How terrible, he writes. This steppe is weird and these people are all practical, and I am the one who is here for nothing. Everybody asks me why, and I have no idea why. Maurice Simashko had a wonderful article called Messers of Turkestan. These are people who did not know the local languages, did not recognize the local culture, and they admired that there they could buy a cart of apples or 10 sheep for 3 kopecks, and so on. And already Tinishpayev also writes about it. This generation was only concerned about profit. They corrupted the local population by taking bribes. During the year, each of them enriched and became a millionaire. Russia's policy changed dramatically when this wave of people rushed, who were not interested and did not even want to understand the local population. And this trend has continued. Fortunately, when asking companions about life in a Kyrgyz-fold country, this region was called then. Prishvin heard legends about Argali. It should be noted that for the first time Europeans learned about the sharp-horned beauties from the book of the great traveler Marco Polo. He wrote that high in the mountains of Asia there are large sheep with horns almost a meter long. Mikhail Mikhailovich rekindled dreams to see this miracle of nature. As a correspondent, he simply ignored his assignment. And having heard about Karkarali, Argali in general, he decided to see and describe them personally. He decided to hunt, because Prishvin was an avid hunter. While traveling along the Irtysh, a journalist meets a man on a boat who invites him to visit the Deaf Town. I could not immediately remember its name. In translation, it meant black pen. Prishvin wrote in his diary and went on another journey, in a tent with a forester's wife. Here are the first impressions. We have been riding in the steppe for a day or two, and it is the same all the way, the same dry, yellow sea. Salt has powdered the road just like snow. The lakes are dead, salty, framed with these awful purple edges. What an abundance of an empty land. But is this land capable of giving anything to a human being? Can it notice its efforts? Any person ever crossing this land feels like a very small and weak creature. Indeed, in comparison with the vast Saryarka, man is minuscule. The tiresome trip is over. On August 18th, Prishvin arrives in Karkarali district. The following lines appear in the diary. The county is the best for cattle breeding, called Arka, which means the ridge of the earth, the navel of the world. Kazakhstan was divided into 3 general governorates, Steppe, Orenburg, and Turkestan, and therefore we had no even political status. The Kazakh political elite was represented in local government structures only at the level of Volost. Volost is the regional Akim by today's concepts. Then all Russian officials were presented. We had no status. Prishvin sees Kazakhs, which are the Kyrgyzs in those days, from a distance and writes, Kyrgyz people in full caps drive sheep, horses. For them I have something special. Kyrgyz will not give a look. That he will notice, but after 10 years, he will say that he met in such clothes, especially if a person was on a horse. He will say what a horse was, and so on. In his works, and especially in his stories about Kazakhstan, the genre of travel notes prevails. Although the people are outlined very clearly, very clear. Of course, there were lyrical landscape sketches, but images were created too. What is the value of these stories, travel notes, and reports to us? This may be the only evidence of the life of the Kazakhs already even new time. The hunt is postponed because the county authorities must find out why the correspondent went to Semipalatinsk and turned out to be in Karkarali. For now, excursions in the neighborhood and lessons of Kyrgyz language, then it is necessary to study the economy of one aul. The hunt for Argali until September 7th. Every day, Prishvin discovers something new. He discovers and fixes. His observation is simply stunning. It is talented, in terms of the fact that it is not just necessary to see, learn, perceive, evaluate. It is necessary to describe. You need to find these details and find these words, this artistic form. From the diary, to love the steppe, you need to be a nomad, you need to ride, sit in winter camp when it is winter, and love cattle. I like it now because I understand it, and before that, it was a yellow brush. All his travels are such a positive view of nature. Well, of course, this was influenced by the influence of Romanticism. And his works are such documentary evidence of the original world that still existed. This is how Prishvin described his trip to Shaitan Kol. The salt lake glitters in the steppe, the light blue lake. The sky is a steppe cloud. Smoke above is a cloud. The fire heaved. A Kyrgyz woman looks like a small yurt. On her head, an owl's feather, to protect against the evil eye. Magnificent landscape has impressed the writer in unimaginable way. And next time he has the opportunity, he comes back again. Indeed, the steppe can win people's hearts. Whichever the memories he would take, not even Russian travelers, even Europeans, Poles. This is the admiration of Kazakh culture, and Kazakh way of life, and Kazakh people. Well, even if we take, for example, even the first Englishmen who were here. Of course they say that, for example, the winter period is a difficult period in the life of nomads. When the description of spring-summer period begins, there's such a positively admiring description of such a heavenly existence, which is practically impossible already. Almost the golden age in the history of mankind. Prishvin was struck by Kazakh's hospitality and this benevolent attitude towards travelers. His surprise and delight are pouring out of his reticent diary entries. I sleep on a horse, only took my riding crop with me, could have disappeared for a month or for a year, and I will revere, feel hunger. Not at all. And here is another entry, almost a declaration of love. Don't want to lose a touch with it. The steppe is alive. It's only now that I understand its life. Before it was all desert to me. In the evening I am invited to a yurt. How tidy it is. New felt. New blanket, new carpet, and clean pillows. But the main thing is people. Totally different. Absolutely with other values. And you know the carriers of this naive culture who have not lost their philosophical attitude to life. I met yesterday's Kyrgyz. They greet me, then ask, "When have you seen?" Yesterday. Everyone laughs happily. How sensitive they are to our jokes. How more delicate they are than our men. That was the way Prishvin perceived ordinary nomads, benevolent and buoyant, not just him. Let's say Werel has a description of the migrations. This is the beginning of the 20th century. This is a period when we actually have already lost half of our wealth, our life, our livestock and lands. And anyway, he says that this is impossible beauty, when caravans move in the blooming steppe, at the head of which the girls are sitting in colorful clothes. It is simply impossible to describe. Prishvin also has it. And this is another routine entry in writer's diary, but how precise and fine it is. 3 boys with their bronze faces, all riding one horse and pulling it in 3 different directions. A living statue. The only happy people are Kyrgyz, Prishvin writes. He is utterly compelled to the simplicity of nomadic life, to the fact that steppe people don't feel an urge to show off in front of a foreign guest. As Prishvin notes, it is impossible to recognize the Tsar of the steppes straight away. An old man in a long robe walks along the herd of sheep, patting them, and you'll never know that he himself owns a herd of 12,000 heads. Yet another stroke in the colorful image of a nomad in the beginning of the 20th century. Bright stroke, and definitely not a last one. And here I am, a steppe horseman. I have a lamb fur, malchai, or my head, welted with great velvet on the top. On my feet I have soft goatskin, ichigi, and over them, heavy, half-felted, half-leathered, septomas. My bishmet tails are wrapped around my legs and pressed against the saddle. Black, loose robe covers bishmet, saddle, and a half of my horse. In my right hand I hold a riding crop. In my left I hold the reins. Dressed in this loose clothing, I'm riding this small, piebald, baldy horse. I look like Kyrgyz, sound like Arab. I'm riding and spreading mirages. Well, it feels like a person just gets a great pleasure. In others, it is such a positive perception of the traditional culture of our people. Actually, it is very important for modern Kazakhs. Well, in the 20th century, it was a clear ideological attitude. It was impossible to speak about the Kazakh traditional culture and Kazakh past from the positive side. Moreover, the expositions were prohibited in museums where they would show the rich life, decoration of traditional Kazakh people. Even it was impossible to describe that they lived well or the wealth was there. For good reason, Prishvin was a rebel. Here is a description of the young bride. In a scarlet velvet dress under a golden stitch. In 3-colored Bukhara boots made of scaly donkey skin. In a sharp conical hat, trimmed with beads and decorated with owl feathers and dark green. Skillfully gathered hanging feather. Long nets, tassels, and twisted cords. These particles are important to us. And we are interested in scientists and Russian travelers and ordinary officials who could describe at least the appearance of the Kazakhs somewhere in the correspondence. There is still a tiny extract that intrigues both readers and researchers of Prishvin's works. Some see it as a prophecy. To the stars this old ground rises, or maybe the stars descend to it. It is here already, and there, further in a very hungry desert. There only wild horses rush to run across from the oasis to the oasis. The ground rises there. Indeed, a little more than half a century later, a rocket will take off from the heart of the hungry steppe. And the first persons will go there to the unknown depths of the universe. The steppe gave Prishvin an inspiration. He gave us short but bright stories about his Kazakhstan voyage, Black Arab, Argali, and others. The ancient legend of the beautiful Bayan entered the lyrical novel at the Devil's Lake. Still, it is precisely in the intermittent diary entries that real Asia is reflected. It is not embellished or retouched. It is wise, unhurried, and philosophical.